I never thought a simple property line could destroy an entire neighborhood, but the day I walked outside and saw what the HOA did to my family's land, I knew this wasn't just about rules anymore. They weren't trying to protect property values. They wanted control, absolute control, and they were willing to break every law to get it. What started as a petty violation notice turned into a war that would leave one person humiliated, another in handcuffs, and a community torn apart. And the worst part, no one saw the twist coming. Do you think they went too far? It was the kind of neighborhood people dream about her. Quiet street lined with manicured lawns, white picket fences, and neighbors who waved from their porches. For years, the Johnson family believed they had found their forever home. A little 3-acre property tucked just far enough from the main road to feel private, but close enough to the town for Sunday morning coffee runs. Life felt good, even perfect. Tom Johnson was a man who worked hard and kept to himself. A former army mechanic turned small business owner. He loved two things above all else: his family and his land. His wife, Linda, spent her mornings in the garden, tending to rows of flowers that spilled color across their yard like a painting. Their teenage son, Jake, spent most afternoons in the workshop with Tom, fixing up old trucks that most people would have sent to the junkyard. It wasn't a mansion. It wasn't luxury, but it was theirs. They'd been there for 7 years without so much as a hiccup. Sure, the neighborhood had its rules, nothing crazy, just basic stuff like no junk cars in the yard and keep your grass under control. And Tom, he followed the rules. He wasn't the kind of man to start trouble, but trouble doesn't always knock politely. Sometimes it barges in with a clipboard and a smile. The first sign came as a whisper, barely noticeable. A new family moved in 2 streets over, who didn't just follow the HOA rules. They worshipped them. They volunteered for committees, filed complaints when trash cans were left out too long, and believed every little detail should be exactly by the book. Tom didn't pay much attention at first. Why would he? He wasn't breaking any rules. At least, that's what he thought. Then came the letter, a crisp, official-looking envelope sitting in his mailbox like a loaded gun. Inside, a notice claiming his workshop, the one he built years ago with permits and county approval, was in violation of community aesthetic standards. Tom stared at the page, confused, angry, but mostly, he felt something he hadn't felt since the army, like he was under attack. He didn't know it yet, but that letter was just a beginning. The calm life the Johnsons had built was about to unravel piece by piece. And before it was over, someone would end up paying a price no one expected.
The first letter felt like a mistake. Tom actually chuckled when he read it the second time, thinking maybe someone in the HOA office typed the wrong address. Community aesthetic standards? He muttered, glancing at his spotless yard, his well-built workshop, and the rows of flowers Linda tended every day. If this was what a violation looked like, then the entire neighborhood was doomed. He set the letter aside, figuring a quick call would clear everything up. But the next day, another envelope arrived, this one stamped "Final Notice" in bold red letters. Violation number 2, unauthorized structure, visible from street. Tom's jaw tightened. Unauthorized? The workshop had been standing for 5 years. Approved by the county, inspected and paid for in full. It wasn't just legal, it was a point of pride. Every nail, every plank of wood, every bolt in that corrugated steel roof had been set by his own hands. Now some paper-pushing HOA volunteer wanted to erase it? The phone call did nothing. The HOA president, a woman named Cheryl, answered with the sweet tone of someone who already decided they were right. "I understand your concern, Mr. Johnson, but the workshop violates our updated community standards. It needs to be removed by the end of the month." "Updated standards?" Tom shot back. "Nobody told me anything about new rules." "Oh, we sent out an email blast," she replied casually, like that made it fair. "Perhaps it went to your spam folder." Click. End of call. That night, Tom sat at the dinner table staring at his plate. Linda noticed the tension in his jaw, the way his fork barely moved. "What did they say?" she asked quietly. "They said take it down," Tom muttered. "Or else?" He didn't say it out loud, but the unspoken words hung heavy in the air. Or else what? The next week answered that question. A bright orange paper appeared on the workshop. Door, $250 fine, failure to comply. Tom's blood boiled. He stormed back into the house, letter in hand, heart pounding like a drum. He wasn't some reckless teenager leaving junk in the yard. He was a property owner. He paid taxes. He had rights. He called again. No answer. He emailed. No response. By the third letter, this one threatening legal action, Tom realized something chilling. The HOA wasn't negotiating. They were declaring war. Things escalated fast after that. Cheryl started showing up unannounced, strolling past the Johnsons' property with her clipboard, like a sheriff patrolling a crime scene. Neighbors started whispering. Some avoided eye contact. Others offered pitying glances, the kind that said, "We don't want trouble too." Then came the citations for petty nonsense. Grass 1 inch too high, trash can visible from the street, unapproved vehicle parked in driveway. That last one hit a nerve. It was about the old Chevy truck Tom and Jake had been restoring for months. It wasn't junk, it was history. It was theirs. And now, according to the HOA, it was unsightly and had to go. Each notice carried another fine. 50, 100, 200, the numbers stacked like bricks on Tom's chest. He paid the first one just to keep the peace. But when the total crossed $1,000, he stopped. They weren't enforcing rules anymore. They were squeezing him. One night, Tom sat on the porch long after Linda had gone to bed. The air was heavy, thick with the smell of rain on the horizon. His hands gripped the arms of his chair, knuckles white. He wasn't just angry, he felt cornered. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was personal. The next morning, he gathered every letter, every fine, every notice, and spread them across his workbench like evidence at a crime scene. Then he started digging. County records, zoning laws, co-bylaws, hours turned into days. And what Tom uncovered made his stomach turn. The new rules Cheryl kept quoting, they weren't even official. The board had drafted amendments, but they hadn't been ratified by a community vote. In other words, none of this was legal. Tom smiled for the first time in weeks. If they wanted a fight, they were about to get one. The next blow came in the form of a lien notice, a lien on his home. The HOA claimed unpaid fines gave them the right to secure their interests. If Tom didn't comply, they could move toward foreclosure. That was the moment something inside him snapped. They weren't just threatening his workshop anymore. They were threatening his family's home. Tom walked outside, stood in the middle of his yard, and stared at the workshop. His jaw clenched. His fists tightened. And then he made a decision that would turn this quiet dispute into the biggest scandal the neighborhood had ever seen. He didn't tear the workshop down. He fortified it, reinforced the doors, installed cameras, mounted motion lights that lit up the property like a football field. But he didn't stop there. One evening, while Cheryl was making her usual inspection, Tom walked out and handed her a letter, his own notice. It stated in no uncertain terms that her actions violated state HOA regulations and that any further harassment would be met with legal consequences. Cheryl didn't flinch. She smiled. That same smug smile that had been haunting Tom for weeks. And then she said something that made his blood run cold. "We'll see about that." The next morning, Tom woke to find bright yellow tow stickers slapped on both of his trucks, the old Chevy and his daily driver. According to the notice, they were inoperable and scheduled for removal. Tom's stomach twisted into knots. This wasn't a warning. It was a declaration. They weren't going after his workshop anymore. They were coming for everything. And then came the day that changed everything. It started with the rumble of a diesel engine at the end of his driveway. A tow truck, backed by 2 HOA volunteers in matching polo shirts, cameras in hand ready to document their victory. But what happened next? No one in that neighborhood would ever forget. Because when the HOA tried to take Tom's property, they didn't know they were about to trigger the most outrageous act of defiance the community had ever seen. And trust me, things were about to get messy. The tow truck stopped halfway up the drive, its tires crunching over gravel. The driver, a heavy-set guy with oil-stained jeans, jumped down, clipboard in hand. Behind him, 2 HOA volunteers, Cheryl's loyal soldiers, stood with their phones, raised like paparazzi, recording every second. Tom walked out slow, calm, almost too calm. His boots crunched against the gravel as he closed the distance. The driver cleared his throat, trying to sound official. "Sir, we've got an order to remove these vehicles. Step aside." Tom didn't move. His voice was low, steady, the kind that makes a man rethink his choices. "You put one chain on that truck and you'll regret it." The volunteers chuckled under their breath. One of them muttered, "It's HOA policy, buddy. Rules are rules." Tom didn't argue. He didn't shout. He just turned, walked toward the old Chevy, and without a word, climbed into the driver's seat. The engine roared to life like a beast waking from hibernation. The sound rolled across the neighborhood like thunder. The volunteers froze. The driver blinked in shock. That truck wasn't dead. It wasn't inoperable. It was alive. And Tom was about to make a point no one would ever forget. He threw it in reverse, swung it around, and backed it right up to the tow truck with just inches to spare. Then he climbed out, grabbed a thick chain from the bed, and hooked it between his Chevy and the tow rig. "Here's what's gonna happen," Tom said, eyes locked on the driver. "You touch my property, I drag yours into the creek. Simple math." The driver's face went pale. The volunteers stopped filming. One of them whispered, "Cheryl's not gonna like this." Tom didn't care. He was done playing by their rules. By sundown, the entire neighborhood knew what happened. Some said Tom went too far. Others said he was a hero. But one thing was clear. The HOA had picked the wrong man to bully. The next morning, Cheryl called an emergency board meeting. The room was packed. Neighbors filled every seat, spilling into the hallway. Voices rose. Fingers pointed. People who had stayed quiet for years were suddenly speaking up about unfair fines, selective enforcement, threats. Tom walked in last, not to apologize, not to beg, but to speak the truth. He carried a thick binder. Every letter, every email, every photo of Cheryl's inspections. And then he dropped the bombshell. Proof that the rule changes weren't ratified, that every fine issued under those fake standards was invalid. The room erupted. Cheryl stammered, tried to regain control, but it was too late. The board voted to suspend all pending fines, cancel the lien, and review every action taken in the past year. Tom didn't smile. He didn't gloat. He just gathered his papers, nodded once, and walked out. For him, this wasn't about winning. It was about protecting what was his. Weeks later, the neighborhood looked the same on the surface. Lawns were still trimmed, flowers still bloomed, and kids still rode their bikes down the street. But something had changed, something big. The HOA didn't push so hard anymore. Neighbors who once stayed silent started asking questions, demanding transparency. Cheryl resigned, citing personal reasons. And the Johnson family? They kept their land, their workshop, and their peace. Tom never wanted a fight. But sometimes, you don't get to choose the battles. You only choose how you fight them. And here's the truth nobody likes to admit. HOAs aren't evil by default. They can protect communities. But when power falls into the wrong hands, it becomes a weapon. So here's the takeaway: know your rights. Read the bylaws. And never, ever let anyone, no matter how official they sound, bully you out of what's yours. Because at the end of the day, property lines aren't just about land. They're about respect. And if you don't stand up for yours, someone else will gladly take it from you.